I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, this is the Volkswagen Passat Alltrack, and if you're pissed off that Subaru Australia hasn't brought the Outback Turbo to Australia, then this may well be the vehicle that suits you. This is the facelifted Passat Alltrack, but it's largely a reprise of the vehicle that's been present on Australian roads for a few years now. But up until this point, the Passat Alltrack was a turbo diesel only. That engine has now gone for the Australian market, but it's been replaced by a really good turbo petrol instead. With 162 kilowatts of power under the bonnet and 350 Newton meters of torque, this engine, which was once used in the Golf GTI and still is, though with a little bit more power, would smoke a 2.5 litre Outback off the line and just about anywhere else. And when we drive the Passat Alltrack, we'll see just why that engine makes such a good contribution to the way this vehicle gets down the road. Now, inside, it's also not too shabby, though one thing Volkswagen have done this year is introduce a more basic version of the Passat Alltrack that competes more closely with the Outback on price. It's only a little bit cheaper than a top-spec Outback, and it does have cloth seats inside with only partial electric adjustment, but it makes this arguably more sophisticated vehicle quite a bit more attainable. There is still a very flash Passat Alltrack Premium model available with all the trimmings inside, of course, and I'll be driving that car separately in a few weeks' time. But in today's video, we'll have a look at the entry-level Alltrack 162 TSI, and as usual, we'll start inside. Here in the cabin of the Volkswagen Passat Alltrack, it's clear that you're sitting in a quality product. The Passat is important to Volkswagen, it's one of their longest running badges, it's one of their flagship passenger cars, and there's a sense that it is a little bit more high-end in here than something like a Tiguan, and especially it's more high-end than a Golf. That comes down to the material selection and just the relative expense of everything that you look at. I also think it is a little bit more mature and a little bit more sophisticated than a Subaru Outback. Though, in terms of value for money, there's no doubt that on the Outback, you get more features than you get in the Passat Alltrack. So you are paying for perhaps a little bit more sophistication here in the Volkswagen rather than outright features. And that's quite evident in this new base model Alltrack, which is $46,990, so it's quite a bit cheaper than Alltracks that you've been able to get in Australia in recent years, but you can see some of those areas in the cabin. Firstly, we're sitting on cloth seats here. It is cloth with a little bit of micro fleece, so the seats themselves actually don't feel cheap, though they don't have full electric adjustment. There is electric adjustment for the backrest, and there's four-way electric lumbar in these seats, which have been certified by the German Institute for Healthier Backs, but there's no adjustment for under thigh angle, and you do have to do the fore and aft yourself, so it's a bit of a weird mix there. I just think there isn't enough support underneath my legs. Now, I do have relatively long legs, but the seat base in this car is just a little bit too flat for me. If you go for the Alltrack Premium, not only do you get very nice leather seats in either black or beige, you have full electric adjustment, including under thigh, which would just make it easier to get comfortable in this car, basically. Now, we've got a new steering wheel here, perforated leather, smooth leather on the top and bottom, new Volkswagen logo, new layout for the shortcut controls and Alltrack branding. I think this looks good, feels good in the hand, and there's paddle shifters for the 7-speed DSG gearbox behind the 162 kilowatt turbo motor as well. Now, if you go for the standard Alltrack, you get analog gauges, which are very handsome, with a small color screen in between. Now, they're not fully digital gauges. You get those in the Premium. Personally, it doesn't put me off. I quite like these traditional instruments instead. And down here, we get an 8-inch screen rather than the 9.2-inch version in the Premium. That being said, wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto is standard across the range, as is satellite navigation. So the car feels pretty well kitted out, and the stereo isn't bad either, even though it's not premium or branded in this particular specification. And practicality is good. We've got large cup holders between the seats, a tray ahead of the shifter, though it doesn't have wireless charging, unlike the Premium. We've got a USB-C port right next to it though for that. Underneath the armrest, we've got a decent sized flock line box. The armrest itself is adjustable, and those door bins are flock lined as well to stop things from scratching around. Plus, all these materials here are soft and squidgy, and the cabin is a very nice place to spend time. Let's have a look in that second row. Here in the back is where the Passat Alltrack is actually seriously comfortable, and there's actually more under-thigh support in the second row of this vehicle than there is in the first row in base trim, with the reminder that the seats in the front row in this car don't have full electric adjustment, but they do in the premium spec of the Volkswagen. But room on offer in the second row is also very generous. For myself, it's 6 foot, headroom is great, I've got heaps. Legroom's awesome, tow room's good, the view out is good, the window is absolutely massive back here, and all of those plush materials continue in the second row of the Passat, unlike in something like Volkswagen's own Tiguan midsize SUV. So this car actually feels quite a bit more expensive and special than a Tiguan. We also have big air vents, we've got a separate temperature zone, map pocket in the back of each of the front seats, a flip down armrest here with 2.5 cup holders, and you know, it's just a pleasant place to spend time. Now, of course, this is only a 5-seater, no more 7-seat wagons left on the market in Australia, which is a bit of a shame, but it is spacious. There's a big boot, as we'll see in just a second, and so as an alternative to an SUV, the Alltrack makes a lot of sense. Here around the back of the facelifted Passat Alltrack, you'll see the new Passat badging in the center of the tailgate, new Volkswagen badge, new 4Motion badge, and restyled taillights. But all in all, this is a pretty subtle facelift. Now, on this new basic entry-level model, you don't get a power tailgate as standard. Thankfully, it's fairly light, but on an Outback, you get that feature no matter which grade you go for. But each of the grades does have a 639-litre boot, which is really spacious. We've got a substantial cargo cover here. We have remote releases to drop those rear seats flat, and you've got a really long load bay when you do that. We've got cubby spaces off to the left and right. We've got cargo hooks, 12-volt socket, tie-down points, and underneath here, we actually have a full-size spare wheel, which makes the Passat Alltrack pretty good for touring in the country, much like the Subaru Outback. So you can see how these vehicles are really squaring up pretty directly, and how no matter which one you go for, you'll be able to drive out long distances in Australia with more peace of mind. So what is the refreshed Volkswagen Passat Alltrack like to drive? And is this a vehicle that you should closely consider if you are looking at the Alltrack's main rival, the Subaru Outback, or perhaps you're considering something more expensive like an Audi A4 Allroad? You know, does the Passat kind of distill that car's experience in a much more affordable package? Well, the answers to all those questions are pretty positive for the Passat Alltrack, because this is actually a really good car to drive. Volkswagens typically do have agreeable driving dynamics, particularly their cars that are based on the true MQB platform. MQB A0, which is used for the cheapest Volkswagens, is also pretty good, but the Passat rides on, you know, the brand's very expensively developed and now, you know, refined over many years MQB transverse platform. So it does start life as a front-wheel drive vehicle on a front-wheel drive platform, but all Passat Alltracks come with standard 4Motion all-wheel drive. Now, it is more of a reactive system than it is in the Subaru Outback, so for people that were constantly going to be driving on slippery surfaces, an Outback is probably a slightly superior option. But of course, if you were going to be constantly driving on slippery surfaces, you'd probably be looking at a heavier duty vehicle anyway. For the vast majority of people looking at a cladded station wagon like this, or a mid-size or large SUV, most of the time the car is on tarmac and you're keeping up your sleeve the ability to go to the snow, or, you know, down a gravel track to a campsite or something like that, all of which the all-wheel drive system that Volkswagen uses on its MQB vehicles, including the Passat Alltrack, is totally up to the job for. And in fact, a couple of years ago, before COVID, I went and did the Southern Hemisphere Proving Ground in Queenstown in the Passat Alltrack, actually, and I found it to be a really great car to drive on snow and ice. But anyway, I digress. Let's talk about the main reason you would consider the Passat Alltrack over the Outback, and that is the engine. In Australia, Subaru have made the blunder that the only available engine is a really weak 2.5 litre naturally aspirated petrol, which is fine if all you ever want to do is drive around in a lethargic manner, but it's not great for keen drivers, and once it's fully loaded, it doesn't really have enough torque to get the job done in a manner I would call relaxed. Here in the Passat, there's also only one engine, but it's a good one, a 2-litre turbo petrol, producing 162 kilowatts of power and 350 newton meters of torque. And you know, it's a bit ironic, isn't it? Because Subaru always used to do engines like this. Old Liberty wagons, old Outbacks, you could usually get them with a turbo petrol or with a big displacement petrol engine, a 6-cylinder that effectively achieved the same results. And now you can't. Even though Subaru might bring the turbocharged Outback to Australia, you know, maybe next year, that isn't locked in. They haven't confirmed it at all. So if you want a vehicle like this, a long wagon with a bit more ground clearance and cladding with a turbocharged engine, you have to look at the Alltrack or something like a Skoda Superb Scout, which is very similar to this vehicle under the skin, or something like an Audi A4 Allroad or A6 Allroad, which are different. Those cars run on the Volkswagen Group's more expensive MLB longitudinal platform, so they are a bit more refined again. But the Passat Alltrack has a great amount of power for a car like this. It's quick, I'm happy to say that. Both with just me in the car and with a few passengers and cargo aboard, it gets along really well. It's fast off the line, it's got a great mid-range, highway and country overtaking is dispatched easily. There's a really good amount of power in this car. Now, it used to only come with a turbo diesel in Australia. That engine has gone. Naturally, the turbo petrol isn't quite as economical and efficient, but it's not too bad. I found that, you know, driving it in a normal manner around town, you're able to get 10 litres per 100 Ks out of it. And on the highway, high sixes is easily achievable. But for the amount of performance you're getting in a car as big as this, with plenty of room in the back and in the boot and standard all-wheel drive, to be honest, I'm okay with those fuel economy numbers. But it's actually the ride and handling where the Passat also sets itself apart, because they're both a little bit sportier than what you'll get in something like the Outback. Now, adaptive dampers are standard, and like the Arteon, Volkswagen have now given the Passat like 20 different adaptive damper settings. There's this massive slide bar where you can truly customize just how firm you want your ride. And there actually is a massive difference between the softest setting and the firmest setting. In the softest setting, it's pretty boaty and floaty. It's a little too soft for me. Likewise, if you dial it right up to the stiffest setting, you're going to catch every single bump in the road and it's going to kind of annoy you. Normal is about right, you know, it's a bit like Goldilocks, isn't it? That's what I left it on. You still have some road feel, it's still a little bit stiff and sporty, but you know, the bumps don't really get to you, they're not really allowed to penetrate the cabin too much. Definitely the Outback is a touch more comfortable, I would say, but the body control in the Volkswagen is superior. And there's also another interesting thing about the dynamics of this car. It really encourages you to push harder. And in that way, it's just like a Golf with which it shares its platform. These cars are fine poodling around town. They're, you know, entirely sufficient, but it's actually when you start pushing them a bit, when you get, you know, if you're a keen driver and you get behind the wheel and you find a good piece of road that you can actually attack with a bit of verve, the Passat loves it. It dives for apexes. You know exactly where the car is underneath you. You're able to sort of move and balance the car in corners really easily. The brakes are up for the job. Yeah, there's definitely something here for a keen driver to enjoy. The safety systems are also up to the job. There's quality lane keep assist that keeps you centered well, adaptive cruise, blind spot monitoring, rear AEB and forwards AEB. So the whole thing has been brought up to date really nicely with the facelift for the Passat that has just arrived. And of course, you can get the Passat in other flavors. There's a traditional sedan, which you can get with this engine. You can also get with a little bit less power as well. There is a wagon in a variety of specs, including the Hero spec, which is the 206 kilowatt motor, kind of from the Golf R. The other car you can consider is, of course, the Skoda Superb Scout, which has a 200 kilowatt 2-litre turbo. And like this car, is a cladded wagon, a little bit of ground clearance. It's actually even bigger than the Passat Alltrack. You'll truly be able to get whatever you want into the Superb. Something a little different there. So those are my opinions on the refreshed Volkswagen Passat Alltrack. I think it's really good that there's a new, more affordable variant that's been introduced that can compete more squarely with the Outback. Though it makes a lot of sense to buy one of these vehicles with all the trimmings where the cabin feels as good as it can be, and it really is a mini Audi in Alltrack premium form. But I'm keen to know your thoughts. Would you consider a Passat Alltrack over an Outback or over an SUV? let me know down below the video in the comments. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.